In the Christian Century, there was a brief article about an event that happened 70 years ago in the closing days of World War II. There's a man named Shalom Lindenbaum, and his father were released from one prison camp, and they were set out on a death march in the cold of winter to another one in the closing days of the war. And there in the windswept prairies of Poland, there was a family that opened their door and welcomed them in, though to much risk to themselves, because if they had been caught by the Germans, they would have been shot. 70 years later, Shalom has been returning to that town and that farmhouse every now and then, and has invited that family to his place in Israel. The daughter of that family was there. She was 20 years old at that time, and when asked why was it that the family risked and opened their house to these two people that they knew were from a prison camp, she said, "We were always taught as Christians that we should have concern for the poor and the homeless, just as Jesus did. And that's what we did." In the gospel lesson, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." And that light shines on our life to help us to decide what we will see, what we will value, what we will do. In the men's group on Thursday, we talked about what does it mean for the light of God to offer some guidance in our life, and how do we experience that guidance? Someone reflected, it often happens in the unexpected events and invitations in life. That you're invited to do something that when you got up in the morning, you never expected that your life would take that direction. An invitation to be a part of a ministry, to help somebody in need, to do something, and you say yes, and all of a sudden there's this new chapter that opens up in your life. I've reflected with the group that oftentimes I seem to experience the guiding of God with a no or a rejection. I have my plans, I've got my chart, I know what I'm going to do, and God says, nope, that's not going to happen. And you have to go through a series of no's before you come to a yes, and then you realize the yes was better than the no's. Remember a conversation with a young woman who was navigating the gap between college graduation and employment. And it was one of those experiences, where you interview for a job, and the one you thought you needed and you wanted ended up being a no. And it's like every place you turn, it's like there's a roadblock put up, and you wonder, where is God taking you? I remember having the conversation with her, and I said, you wonder what God has planned for you. And she says, I know. I wish He would tell me. Well, it turned out that no opened up a pathway so that 2 weeks later, the job she did get was a whole lot better than she ever could have imagined. The leading of God in our life is not always a straightforward thing. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And He says that in the midst of a festival, a Feast of Tabernacles. And what that festival does is celebrate or remember an event in the life of Israel as they were making a journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. And they spent 40 years in the wilderness, really did not know where they were going or how they were going to get there or what it would be like at the end. But it's a festival that talked about how God would lead them step by step in that journey. When they crossed the Jordan and they settled down, God instructed them not to forget that time of journey. And that even though they had arrived and it's like, we are now in the Promised Land, they were not done with God. And God was not done leading and guiding them. And each year they would build these temporary shelters, and they would live in them and eat in them. And they would remember that life is always a journey. And that even when we reach those moments or times of stability, when we might say we have arrived, we still need the guiding of God. There is only one true destination, and that is in God. Everything else in life, it's just a stopping place along the way to that destination. We recognize in the course of our life that there can be those moments of darkness or confusion, and we recognize we desperately need the light and the guiding of God. We search for meaning, for something more, and we know we are not there yet. But there is another danger. And that other danger is that we might think that we have in some ways arrived, that the light that we need in life, well, we have what we need. Thank you very much. I have accomplished my goals. A goal perhaps for a certain job, or to marry a special person, or to build that dream house, or to have children, or watch them grow up, to retire, to have enough freedom to travel and enjoy life. I have arrived. And we are done. And we think no new measure of light is needed. The Scriptures tell us that there is no destination that is finally the end. But it's just a stopping place, that every ending really also marks a beginning, a new chapter, and we need the light of God. So the basic question for this morning is this: what does it mean for Jesus to be the light when I have enough? What does it mean for Jesus to be the light when I'm satisfied? What does it mean for Jesus to be the light when it seems like I have what I need? And what does this gathering here as a church have to tell me about this light of Christ? When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, He's saying two things. One, He's saying, I am the light in your path. I'm the one that brings you from one place to the next in your life. I am the light for your journey of life. Jesus, in Him, you find the guidance that you need. But He's also saying something else. When He says, I am the light of the world, He's also saying, I am the goal. I am the journey itself. I am as the light at the heart of your life. And in me, you find the center of meaning. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, He's saying something much more fundamental than just simply being a flashlight for our journey. I was visiting a member the other day, and she was telling the story of her son, who belongs to a prison ministry team. And they will go to a maximum security prison and do ministry for 3 or 4 days. And in the course of that 3 or 4 days, they will even spend overnight in the prison cells in that maximum security prison. In that time, they offer Bible study and worship and just simply a presence, the light of Christ, to them. She says, they also bring cookies and fried chicken. He said, you never saw a group of men so happy as when they have a chance to grab a fresh cookie in a prison. There is great joy in the streets. Now here's the thing. What does it mean to think about Jesus as the light in a place of darkness like that? To think about that Jesus is the light for my journey when you're talking to a group of men who in a sense have arrived, they have reached their destination on earth, they are not going anyplace at all. What does it mean for Jesus to be the light of my life when I am so stuck? That prison ministry gets at something essential that really is a part of all of our lives, that there is a spiritual dimension to our life, that there is a spiritual journey that we must take, and that journey is something more or other and along with wherever we might find ourselves in this earthly life. Whether what degree of freedom that we experience or what degree of confinement we experience, He is still the light of our journey. I visited someone earlier this week who was dealing with cancer, and she said, I know my destiny. And we talked about the light of Christ in her life, particularly in this moment of confinement because she was dealing with cancer. And we talked about her son who struggles with faith and who wrestles in a kind of a way where he says, well, if Jesus is light, how many watts does He show? What does He shine a light on? How does this work? And because in some ways he couldn't square it with sort of a material view of life, he couldn't believe. And we realized that in some ways to engage with Jesus as the light of my life, it takes an act of trust. It takes a risk or a leap of faith. That Jesus is the light of the world is not just simply an idea or a theory, but it's a reality that you have to live into. It's something that you have to trust. When we gather here at church, we gather here with this conviction that we see something about the truth of our existence in Jesus, and that in some ways to live this light without the life of Jesus is to walk in darkness. It is to miss something essential about who we are. And that what we do here as followers of Jesus, and the songs of hope we sing, and the acts of mercies that we do, all make sense because Jesus is the light. Because Jesus is light, we can wrestle with deep questions and not be crushed by them. Because Jesus is light, we cannot be defeated by suffering or loss. Because Jesus is light, our hope can be informed by prayer and God's future. Anne Lamott, one of my favorite writers, once wrote, I make my son go to church, not because simply I can, because I outweigh him by 75 pounds, but because in that church there's something beautiful that happens. For there's a group of people there who live by a light that is more than just simply the dim glimmer of a candle in their own soul. And that this group of people is a group that cares passionately about justice and freedom and grace, out there on the streets and in the church praying, preparing big platters of food for the hungry and the homeless. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. He's a light to guide our way, but more than that, He is a light for something deep inside of us. And He is a light worth sharing.